Line to track 10, kick 1, Y81. That'll do. Welcome back to the Seaboard Central, everyone, in part 5 of the Realistic Ops series. Man, this yard is already turning out to be a blast to operate, and there's still a long ways to go to it. But in this episode, we're going to talk about keeping things moving and avoiding congestion and delay, and some practices that the prototype does to improve their service metrics. So it's going to be a pretty detailed video, so I hope you'll keep watching. And if you enjoy it, as always, I appreciate a thumbs up. So without further ado, let's get started. In Realistic Ops Part 4, we discussed how rail yards play a vital role in operations. They are so important. If managed poorly, they can have a negative impact to the network velocity. Network velocity is a term associated with the overall average speed of the trains operating over the railroad. Another term associated with metrics that railroads use to measure performance is terminal dwell time. Terminal dwell is the average time it takes for a car that arrives into a yard before it departs on its next train. Lastly, rail yards are measured by connection performance. Connection performance is a metric that measures the average time it takes for a rail car to make its next movement on a connecting train. Think of this metric like when you are making a connecting flight on an airplane. It works the same way. Cars are scheduled to arrive into a yard on one train, then they are classified to go out on another train. If they miss their connection, it could result in a 24-hour delay. So one of the things I've done to help improve the operations here at Gadsden is to come up with a static yard chart. And I did have something similar to this on my old layout in the Griffin yard. And what this does is I've assigned tracks for certain traffic or blocks that are coming into the yard. So the cars arrive, and then this is a chart pretty much telling the train crews which track for each particular block. For example, cars that are going to be for the Gadsden local area customers are going all the way over to track 12. And here you'll see I put down the typical, how many cars the track typically holds for like a 60-foot car. And you see 10, 11, and 12 are only 8 cars long. So I've got 10 and 11 for the Raglan traffic. And then track 9 I've got designated for Griffin traffic, outbound traffic. Track 8 is for Carrollton traffic. It holds 11 cars. And then here you'll see cars that are going to interchanges. So for instance, track 7 could be CSX, 6 BNSF, NS in 4 and 5. And then track 3 is my outbound traffic, where I build trains that go out. For example, will be Macon. So I could put Macon cars in track number 3, and when a train that's going to Carrollton or to Griffin, whichever, whether it's 480 or 484, they'd grab a hold of wherever the Griffin or the Carrollton traffic and put it on the head end of the Macon traffic and then depart. Then tracks 1 and 2 are Macon staging, and tracks the main line and the pass tracker for Norfolk Southern staging. And you see here I've got the cars that'll hold temporarily right now, and I'll explain why this is just temporary. There's the shot of the Seaboard Central track plan for when I hope the railroad is, when it's finally built out. So you'll see, here's the Gadsden yard here, and you'll see how these tracks curve around, and they end up going through the backdrop. Here's what I'm talking about. You can see those 5 tracks that'll go through the hole in the wall. And that hole in the wall is right here. So what they're going to do is they're going to go underneath the layout in the adjacent room. It's just staging tracks. And they're going to come out right here. So you can see up here I drew out the staging tracks that's underneath this section. And they end up coming out right here. And then they'll climb a grade all the way around to reach this level before they end up going back down the helix back to the yard. All right, so again, let's look at this. This is the 5 tracks that end up going through the backdrop, and they'll connect. There's basically double-ended yard tracks. This inside track is with the tightest curve is a 24-inch radius curve. This outside track is a 36-inch radius curve. These 2 tracks on the outside are the Norfolk Southern trackage, so you will see a train come through the backdrop on this track and go the other direction on this track. 2 Norfolk Southern run-through trains that operate over the layout. This track and this track are both for Macon staging, so trains will come through the backdrop on these 2 tracks, and then the engines will use another track to run around to go back to the other end. That's how these 2 tracks will be operated. So you'll see them come into there. Basically, these are just 2 Macon staging tracks, and use either this track, or any of these other tracks, whatever's open. They get the engines back to the other end to couple up to the cars for the next operating session. So looking at this plan again, you'll have trains that come in from Carrollton that will come in. When they reach this point, this is the yard limits, they'll contact the Gadsden yardmaster before passing this point right here. And the yardmaster tell the train which track to take, whether to go to the main line or the inbound track to get to the yard. And if they need to hold up at a certain point. So they may go halfway around the helix and hold up at a certain point that I've got designated here. Now at this point, the yardmaster may tell the train to come all the way down to this point and hold, while the yard crew uses the other track to go up the helix and couple to the rear of the train. Then the engines can cut off and go over to the shop, park their power, and the yard job can start classifying the cars into their proper tracks. Now for the opposite move, the train, once the crew gets on their power in the shop, in the ready tracks, 1 or 2, they'll contact the tower here. The yardmaster will let them know what direction to come out, and they'll be basically just taxiing to their train. Once they get on their train and the brake test is performed, then they can depart out and go on their run, whether it's the local or T85 going up towards Raglan, or 480 or 484 headed towards Carrollton. When it comes to customers, they expect cars to arrive safely and on time, but can customers have a negative impact on overall network velocity? The answer is yes. Let's take, for example, my ADM facility on the layout. Now you'll see the track in the back is for tank car loading of ethanol. Well, I have 12 cars assigned to the pool of cars that get loaded from this facility. And you'll see the track will only hold 6 cars. That means there's 6 cars out on the road going to the destination and coming back. All 12 won't fit on this track. But what happens if they did? All 12 showed up. Well, obviously, the railroads would have to store them in the yard until there was some available space. So the problem we're up against is there's only a limited amount of space in the yard to store equipment. So what can the railroad do to encourage a customer to make sure they keep their cars moving? And that is, they can assign a charge called demurrage charges. But before we talk about demurrage charges, let's talk about the difference of types of customers. So you have 2 basic types of customers, what are called open gate and closed gate customers. Basically, an open gate customer is when the cars arrive, they can be placed. as soon as they arrived. For a closed gate customer, they actually order their cars in. They'll contact the railroad and say they want this particular car in. And let me show you an example of some closed gate customers on my layout. So one industry in particular that's considered a closed gate industry on my new layout will be Southwire, this industry code C05. And this track right here is where plastic pellets are spotted. And this track right here is where tank cars of chemicals are spotted. And then you have box cars that are spotted in this location. So once a car arrives in Carrollton, the customer is notified the cars are available for placement, and then they can order them in by car number. And here's one of the tank cars that will end up going to Southwire in Carrollton. And you see here, it'll come through Gadsden Yard and get put on the outbound train headed to Carrollton. And here's in real life, here's a tank car going to the real location. You can see this one come in New Orleans. It was interchanged by the KCS in New Orleans. At New Orleans, it's generated a Birmingham block. There it was humped at the hump yard in Birmingham. It was made into an Anniston block, right? Anniston, Alabama. Then it was classed there at Anniston for Bremen. And it was on a different train. It had to, all these were making connections. So the first place that needed to make a connection was in Birmingham to Anniston. Then in Anniston, they needed to make another connection on a different train headed to Bremen. And there it was set out at Bremen, Georgia, to catch a train to Carrollton. And you can see this is where it was scheduled. This shows the scheduled date and time when it was due to arrive in Carrollton. And at Carrollton, it would be ordered in to be placed. So again, there's only limited capacity at Carrollton. So in one case, since Southwire goes through so many cars, one of the shippers, Dow Chemical, decided to lease a track from Norfolk Southern. So we have a track right here that's called the Dow lease track. So extra cars that show up that aren't, while they're waiting to be ordered in, they can be placed on this track, the Dow lease track. So here's a plastic pellet hopper, covered hopper, rated for DOWX. They'll end up going to Southwire, but it could be billed to the lease track. And here's something in real life. You see this one's coming off the BNSF, interchange BNSF New Orleans to Norfolk Southern, going to Carrollton, and you'll see the Dow Chemical Company lease track. So came out of Seadrift, Texas, headed to Carrollton. And it'll go to that lease track until they're ready to order it in for placement. So when it comes to private rail cars, just like these cement hoppers that are at National Cement, once they get spotted on the customer's track, the clock stops and they're no longer on demurrage. But if they're holding them outside because there's no room to place them on the track, they can incur demurrage charges. And it's just a tool the railroad uses to keep things moving, keep things fluid. And the last thing I'll go over is car hire. This is something that occurs on empty railroad marked cars like that CSX covered hopper or those BNSF covered hoppers. And this is a charge other railroads use against another carrier in the event they're holding their cars pretty much hostage and not returning them to them. So they have, once they become empty, if the longer they sit on another railroad they don't belong on, they can incur car hire charges at a daily rate. So it's pretty important to get those cars back off the line and back on the home rails. So I hope you found this video insightful and interesting. Obviously, we don't assess charges on our model railroad like car hire or demurrage, but we can come up with things like a lease track or a static yard plan to help improve the overall flow of traffic over our lines. Now next week, we're going to go into detail about car types, so be sure to tune back in for that. And then I'm going to show you how I come up with the paperwork to operate the trains before we go into a real operating session. So as always, I thank you for tuning in. Until next time, happy model railroading.